Stopping advanced threats requires knowing exactly what you're up against. ExtraHop Reveal X is the only solution that shows you not just where intruders are going, but where they've been. 90-day look-back and complete network visibility across the data center, cloud, and device edge help security teams respond 84% faster with ExtraHop Reveal X network detection and response. Explore the interactive demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Lassadorian. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review those often and will reach out to you if you've been approved to come on one of the shows. Also, if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available online for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, Paul. So the articles, but before I put it in the opening, 7 Super Bowl rings for one Mr. Tom Brady. I mean, it's a pretty amazing feat when you think about it, right? We've seen a lot.
There was some statistic, Matt, like he's got more wins or the highest winning percentage out of anyone out of all of the 4 major sports. Mm-hmm. I mean, just to compete at that level, one thing that I noticed about Tom Brady and others that compete at that level on a kind of similar playing field is that they're never happy. They never settle. They're always constantly tweaking something about their regimen, their routine, their preparation. It's always constantly being tweaked to see if they can get more performance out of it. They never, ever, ever settle. I think that was really telling about, if you translate that into your career. And for this show on CISOs, like never settle with where you are in terms of your security programs, your technology infrastructure, because as soon as you do, you have no chance of being the best, none whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting to me on this storyline a little bit is, what if he stayed with the Patriots for a second, right? Let's just play this out. Does he continue to evolve his game? Right. Because you kind of get used to the routine, but by changing, by going down to Tampa, I mean, he had to change. I mean, think about all the leadership communication skills he had to get that team aligned.
But let's talk football for a second, too. I mean, I don't know if he went to Tampa and they kind of laid all this out for him, but the way that it worked out was like, all right, hey, you're going to come to Tampa. You're going to have a defense that kicks butt, an offensive line that's really good. By the way, we're going to bring Gronk out of retirement. We're going to get you Antonio Brown. And if you can take us all the way to the Super Bowl, we're going to have home field advantage. Like, how do you say no to that? Right? I mean, those are all the things he didn't have at New England, right? I mean, that past few years in New England, I think we really struggled in those areas. And it just goes to show you that, yes, one person in the quarterback is really important, but you have to surround yourself with a great team, I think, is the other lesson as well, Matt. They gave him great people to throw to, and they gave him a great environment to flourish in. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think I don't think you take away anything from Belichick, too, because I was thinking about that. They at one time had a fantastic team, but don't forget, a lot of those coordinators went off to get head coaching jobs.
Yeah,
I think that really messed with the system.
And that's what happens.
Yep.
And sometimes change is good for a leader to kind of take yourself to the next level. I thought he did a fantastic job with that team. It took them a while to figure it out.
Yeah.
They were 7-5, 12 weeks in. They were still figuring it out.
I think that's something that really, in this story that we're talking about, that highlighted for me, like being comfortable with change is one of the things that can make you a great leader. It certainly can, right? Tom Brady had to be really comfortable with change. As he got older, he had to change his regime. And I obviously, being a New England fan, I follow Tom Brady a lot more closely than maybe some of our listeners, right? Always changing his routine as he got older. A lot of professional athletes go through this. They have to change their routine, right? Joe Rogan did a great interview with Mike Tyson. It's absolutely hilarious, by the way. And, Tyson's in his 50s and was like, I want to go box again. Like, think about how your routine changes, right? And so being comfortable with change, I think, is another great takeaway, Matt.
Yeah, no, agreed. It's a great game. I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, yeah.
One, because I'm not a Chiefs fan, so.
I know. I feel bad for my neighbors. They're Chiefs fans. I'm like, I've been there. I've been there. Go to Super Bowls and lost. It sucks. It does. But they get a young quarterback. They'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine. Now, we brought in a bunch of articles for kind of this early phase of a CISO discussion. There were a couple very interesting articles that I thought were some good foundational articles. We were talking with Ben last segment, about being a CISO, and when you get that first CISO job, what's it like, and what do you expect? And there were some really good, just some foundational articles. So this first one from EC Council talks about a guide to building your cyber security risk management framework. We talked a lot in the last segment more about risk than vulnerabilities, threats, because that's the role the CISO is moving into. So EC Council lays out this kind of like 9-step framework around building a risk management framework. I thought it was good.
Yeah.
There's a couple areas here I would debate, like the order of a couple of the steps.
Yeah, but I think it's hard to create a guide, right? Because the guide is going to be different for every. It's hard to create that high-level guide. I think it's good for people who want a casual read to kind of get a general feeling about some of the things you should be thinking about, right? Don't mistake that for like there's like a guide for being a CISO that you can just pick up this guide and you can be effective as a CISO. Like that's not it at all. There's books, there's compliance program, there's all this stuff. But even at that, again, I think it goes back to some of the qualities we just talked about at the top of this segment: being comfortable with change, never settling, and constantly making those tweaks. And I really, Ben kind of stoked the fire as some of the things you have to think about when you're a CISO and making sure security is applied to certain processes. Just going to require different skills. Guides may be helpful, but certainly not the whole picture.
Yeah, and they kept this high enough level, Paul, where I think it can be useful for a lot of organizations and for CISOs. Understand your security landscape, identify the gaps, right? All great steps. I think they jump into create a team and assign responsibilities. Yeah, I get it. I got gaps. Might need to fill them. But they don't talk about implementing a risk management framework until much later. And I think part of when you go to hire a team, you also want to have a good idea of kind of which framework you're going down and kind of what things you're planning to implement, because they could influence what type of team members you bring in. So there was a couple things that were slightly out of order for me that I'd want to know which risk framework I was going to use based on my initial analysis. That could help guide my decisions into hiring the right resources on the team to fill some of those gaps. That was the one place.
Yeah, because that it's establishing that risk appetite is like the first step. Those high level conversations, which as you and I have laid out a lot in the past, right? Is okay. Then where do we go next? We're going to attach to some kind of standard as a good starting point, right? In those early conversations, drive which may drive what else you want to do, what people you bring on the team, like you said, where the organization is the most weakest, what level of security maturity they have. Like all of those are factors that play into it.
Yeah, so things like step 7 and 8, implement a risk management framework and develop a risk assessment program.
Yeah,
I'd move them up a little higher if I were doing this. That way, I'd have a better idea on the type of team and the types of controls I was going to implement in my organization. They followed this blog up with a second blog, and I referred to it in the first article. It's kind of hyperlinked in there, and it's the risk management best practices post-COVID-19. Word of caution, there's a couple things in here that just didn't make sense to me. So, all right, yes, got to determine my weak spots. I need to apply new technologies and techniques. And then it says install antivirus programs. Like, if I'm deploying new and advanced capabilities, why am I talking antivirus? It just seems really out of place for me. It's like, okay, maybe this is a little too early on.
Yeah, we should almost do a series of segments on, because I think I've got certainly... You and I both have materials on how to do this, or a guide on like what roads to go down. And you and I both have some quadrants and graphs that kind of lay out. Like jumping right to antivirus is one thing. Like you got to think about endpoint as a bucket, and detect, protect, react, collect logs, and analyze. That's all part of that bucket. And there's like different phases and things. Sunil did a great job with the matrix thing that he put together. You've seen that, right? We had Sunil on ESW.
Got it.
It's the cyber matrix thing. In any case, like,
yeah,
we pull from multiple different standards and things like that. I think we could do better than a lot of these articles are. The articles are great. I'm going to try to knock the articles. EC Council's great, right? And they're good for, again, a quick read to glean some knowledge and help guide. But I think there's a little meatier stuff we could put together.
Yeah, and when you just jump into things like antivirus and VPNs for remote access, you're like, wait, you're not thinking about it holistically enough.
Right. You need a remote access solution. That's it's part security, it's part IT, it's about the needs of the business, the risk appetite of the business, and then you have to put the solution together. And you may have to displace a solution that already exists. Now you're talking about an upgrade project, all in that one fell swoop.
Yep, exactly right. So the first two articles really are talking about building your risk management framework. The next article, the big 8 around governance, is now I have to manage and govern that program, right? So I thought it was a really interesting, logical next step, to talk about, then what's the governance aspects around that program that you just put in place. There's some really there's a couple little like time bombs in here that I thought were interesting. I was hoping Jason was going to be on today because he would get into a couple of these with us. One is empower the CISO to report directly to the CEO.
Yeah, I mean that's when he's lived that. He's lived through not being that and being that, right? So he speaks from experience on that point wholeheartedly. But then we heard Ben say there are Fortune 500 companies that still don't even have a CISO. I'm still, let alone that's still not sitting, reports to the CEO. It's still not sitting well with me. I'm really concerned for our critical infrastructure. If you think about where the Fortune 500 play here in the U.S., being concerned about our country selfishly, that's a little concerning for me. Yeah, there's a couple more nuggets in here that I thought were interesting. Allocate at least 10% of your IT budget to cybersecurity. Now, I know there's a ton of vendors out there that would love to see 10% IT budgets dedicated to security because we're used to like 3 to 4%. Right. Yeah, no, that's true. But I think you can easily start creeping. And again, it's not about the money that you spend, whether you're spending 3 to 4 to 10 in looking at governance of your cybersecurity program. These are talking about more of the higher level kind of things, right? Rubber has to meet the road. What I'm finding is extremely difficult, and I've pushed a lot of people in our interviews too, and they all agree that it's difficult, is implementing both the process and the technical controls to be able to go, if a control falls off in the forest, how do I know, and how do I fix that easily? And not just in one area. I find a lot of organizations will do it well in vulnerability management, right? I mean, a lot of great organizations kicking butt in vulnerability management. But then you go to cloud posture and you go to endpoint config, and some of that starts to fall down. So that's hard. That's hard. Yeah, definitely. Ben brought up communicate with customers and suppliers, the whole third party aspects. And one that ties into the next article is stay up to date on regulations. Look, if you're in the role and governance is part of this, you have to understand what's going on with the different regulatory requirements that are coming out. So for the next article, I put in what I thought was a great guidebook, like a hand guide for CISOs. It links to the big federal and state regulations that you potentially would fall under in this role. A lot of this alphabet soup I've dealt with in my career for a long time. I mean, I started doing the work that I was doing in the compliance side because of Sarbanes-Oxley and third-party vendor management, and it was all based on a lot of the stuff with Sarbanes-Oxley. And Sarbanes-Oxley was the early 2000s. That was pre-2008. Yes. But Sarbanes-Oxley was based on a series of other events where the CEOs weren't being held responsible basically for what was on the books. Well, executives in general. Not just C-levels, right? Executives in general, Yeah, Gramm-Leach-Bliley was the federal law that allowed the banks to do insurance. Sarbanes-Oxley was more for public companies because of all the things with like WorldCom and that's what it was. Enron. Was that Enron? Yeah, Enron, WorldCom. Yes. There were a few of them. Yeah. So like now with compliance, we just did an interview with Josh Marpet about CMMC. And the nonprofit he's creating to help organizations. It was kind of a great dive into compliance. there are things you must do to be compliant with laws. There are things you must do to be compliant with compliance standards, but then it starts to go down a rabbit hole because compliance standards, such as PCI, say you must or you should based on what it is, and then not complying with that could be like you have a chance to improve, or you're subject to fines, and you have to weed through those waters to basically figure out like what you must do and like maybe what you should do, and then the other bucket of we accept the risk kind of thing. And that's compliance in a nutshell, basically.
And it goes back to the risk conversation that we started with, right? Is once you understand risk tolerance, then you know what are these regulations you're going to do, which ones you're not going to do, which ones you're willing to pay fines on. I mean, PCI is a perfect example. At a certain level, certain merchants, it's probably cheaper for them to pay the fine than it is to implement all the security controls. I mean, that is a logical decision to make for certain organizations. If you understand the risks associated with that stance, you could do that, and some have.
Yep.
Let's see. Next article. 3 ways. I think this is 3 ways to communicate. Speak the board's language around cyber risk. And again, you see the theme, right? We're talking risk to the board. We're not talking threats and vulnerabilities. Yeah. If you're going to be an effective CISO, you have to understand and associate cyber risk with business risk and be able to have those conversations with the board. And I think you're going to see more of this. There's some stats in this article about how many people have, cybersecurity at the board level and what it's going to be in a few years. But it's really just talking more about, all right, how do you present the data in a way that makes sense to the board members, right? It is not technology speak here. It is not necessarily vulnerability and threat speak. They want to understand, okay, what's going on and how does that pose risk to the business?
Yeah, and I'm realizing that how important that is in one respect, that if the board asks, hey, what are we doing about cybersecurity? And they get back a bunch of technical jargon and stuff they don't understand, they're not going to ask that anymore, right? We want to be in the position where the board, there's an agenda item in the board meetings, globally that they're asking, okay, cybersecurity status, what is that? And if you've got good answers that are communicated correctly to the board, it's going to be an agenda item and something that they ask about. If you're kicking them back with, like you said, vulnerabilities and threats, that's not going to be effective. And they may not ask.
Yeah, and it could be a graphic. It could be something that's not so detailed. It's something a little higher level. Draw a picture for them, right? Help them understand what are those potential impacts to the overall business, because most board members are more financially focused than they are cyber focused, right? To them, it's about revenue, profitability, customer retention, things that are going to drive the business. It's not about, well, I've got APT 31 over here that's doing this. It doesn't equate. Doesn't equate. This other article talks about some high-level threat intel reports and how to build threat intel reports for the board. It was interesting. I thought I pull some interesting nuggets out of here, but as I was digging into it, I'm like, do you really want a cyber threat intel report to some of these folks? I mean, can you ever make a cyber threat intel report really easy to understand and translate to the business? I haven't seen one yet, so I'm not quite sure that this article is going to help some people who need to do that, but I was hoping to get some better nuggets out of this one.
And I think you have to balance when you extrapolate too high up, what's the value? Like, what are you trying to communicate? And if you have to dilute that message enough to make it fit in a board meeting, is there really a message left at the end of the day? And maybe you're better off communicating something else that speaks to that, but it's not, I'm going to give you a cyber threat report, right? Because it's probably, if you're not going to be talking about APT groups and that kind of stuff, like, really, what's the point? You're better off talking about your risk posture, your overall security maturity curve, how that's going to enable you to be compliant via CMMC. That's a great example, right? Hey, we want to do business with the federal government, therefore we have to meet these standards. Here's where we're at. Here's what it's going to cost maybe. And here's the business we're going to be able to do because we're at that certain level, and here's what it's going to cost to maintain it, right? That's a much better
way
cover.
more effective than a cyber threat intel report.
Yeah. I mean, that might be important for maybe a working group, kind of similar to how laws are developed maybe in this country, right? There's a working group that is digging into the details and going through that and producing those reports. But when it gets presented ultimately right to the president, it's still down. And other people have taken that into consideration.
Yep. This last article, it was interesting. 12 security career killing things. And I thought I would go through this list and tell you which ones of these I've actually done or haven't done.
Yep.
So believing security is the end goal. No, I've never done that one. I knew from very early days that security was a process, not a project. And when compliance got introduced into the mix in the late 90s and early 2000s, it only made it more evident that security was not an end game. So I learned that very early in my career. So I've never made that mistake.
I'd argue you have to do a lot of these things.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes.
Number two.
Sometimes to be right.
Everybody gets stuck.
Sometimes you got to lose your cool. Sometimes you got to be tactical and not strategic. Right. I mean, there's pluses and minuses to doing all these things at certain times. You also got to make mistakes too, and learn from them. There's just no getting around that.
Exactly. I think being too timid could get you into some trouble. I mean, again, most people who know me know I'm not very timid. Yes, I can lose my cool and have, right. I'm sure, multiple times somewhere along the way.
Yeah, but some of that speaks to passion too, And, there are times when maybe you want to be timid as well. I mean, I'll admit when we first, were acquired by CRA, you got to feel it out, right? Put your ears on and listen first. Maybe some people mistake that as timid. Put your ears on and listen first before you jump in and do things. So I think, don't think of these as all things that could kill your career. Think of them as tools that you can use, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the run around building other skills. I mean, if I would have thought way back in the day that I would be in product management, product marketing, marketing strategy, no. I mean, back then it was technology driven, which is
build the right skills at the right time. I would take this and change that into exactly that, right? Sometimes maybe you're building skills, but they're not the right ones, and that's also a failure. So I would change that one if I were writing this article. You got to build the right skills at the right time.
Exactly.
And that's hard. I mean, that's easier said than done, certainly.
Yeah,
got to have
of course.
A crystal ball and someone be predict, but you make your best guess and stick with it. Certainly don't not build any skills. That would be bad. Right?
That is true. And you may stay in security, you may not stay in security. I mean, building those skills gives you other opportunities, both in the profession and out of the profession. I think they're all valid. And, sometimes they help you, kind of raise your game and be a little more strategic. Maybe you don't want to be, that's okay. I thought it was a very interesting list, and I was like, oh yeah, I've done that one. Ooh, yeah, I did that one. Oh yeah, that's probably why I got, no.
Yeah, I would say, build some skills around what you're trying to secure is a good one too. If you're or looking to break into ICS as a security, you got to learn what ICS is. Same thing with software. If you want to, be in DevOps and be secure and building software, you got to spend some time building some software. I think it's very vertical dependent too. I think healthcare can kind of be the same way, right? Just walk right in cold, having never done healthcare, and be a CISO. Probably not too many CISOs that are in that position, right? They look for people with that have some healthcare background most of the time. Exactly. That's not a hard and fast rule, but most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Got to have some skill set, typically in the industry, in order to get in. Yeah, for sure. All right, that's my list of articles for the week. Paul, thank you for joining me. We'll get Jason back on here in a couple weeks, and we'll do this again.